happy to see all these faces here today. I think there are a couple people still in line. I'll try to talk loudly so they can hear me. My name is Karis Templeman. I am the program manager of the Taiwan Democracy Project, which is part of the Center on Democracy Development and the Rule of Law here at the Freeman Spogli Institute. The talk today, I really want to acknowledge, is co-sponsored by the U.S. Asia Security Initiative, which is a fairly recent project that Carl Eichenberry heads, and Carl is right here. And I want to thank him for helping us to bring our fabulous speaker here today. Carl and our speaker, Cortez Cooper, go way back, as far as I hear. And in fact, Cortez said he very nearly ended up in Beijing with Carl when he was there in the late 90s. Let's see, this is the last talk of our fall programming. We do have some fun stuff coming up for the winter. Most of you probably know there's an election coming up in Taiwan on January 16th. Both Larry Diamond and I will be in Taiwan for that election, and so we'll have lots to talk about after that election is concluded. And so we're going to hold a round table. We set the date for that. It's the week after the election. I'm forgetting the date right now, but look for an announcement for that. We'll have a round table and discuss what is likely to be a pretty striking result in Taiwan, a pretty fundamental shift in direction there. That's at least what the polls are predicting.
Tuesday, January 26th.
Tuesday, January 26th. There
Free lunch again.
So that's coming up. We are also planning a kind of mini conference to revisit the Trans-Pacific Partnership and Taiwan's potential place in that. That's coming up February 9th. Now that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is actually a real agreement with real names on paper and real text, we can actually revisit some of the questions that came up in our 2013 conference on this topic. So keep an eye out for those two events coming up next in the winter quarter.
Let me give you a piece.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker now. We have Cortez Cooper. He is a senior international policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. He's at the D.C. office. And he's been at RAND since April 2009, and he provides assessments of security challenges across a wide spectrum of arenas, political, military, economic, cultural, and informational, and covers a broad range of U.S. Government clients. Mr. Cooper, prior to joining RAND, was the director of the East Asia Studies Center for Hicks and Associates. He has also served in the U.S. Navy Executive Service as the senior analyst for the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific, U.S. Pacific Command. He was the Senior Intelligence Analyst and Asia Regional Specialist in the Pacific Theater, and he advised the Pacific Command's PACOM's leadership on trends and developments in the command's area of responsibility. Before his Hawaii assignment, he was a senior analyst with Accenture Technology, and before that, he had a full 20-year military career, which included assignments as both an Army Signal Corps officer and a China Foreign Area officer. So in addition to numerous military decorations, the Secretary of Defense awarded Mr. Cooper with the Exceptional Civilian Service Award in 2001. And if that isn't enough to preview our speaker, I should also add that he was actually in Taipei on a trip with a bunch of people from RAND during the meeting between Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping. And so he was able to experience firsthand the kind of hubbub that meeting caused. And in part because of that, he's actually focused his remarks today, his talk today, on that meeting and more broadly what the 2016 election may imply for cross-strait relations and China's future security policy. So I should add one other thing. If you do have cell phones on you, please turn them off so that we can give our full attention to Mr. Cooper. All right, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mars. I don't mind musical accompaniment. That's we may need some of that as I go through this. First, thanks very much, Dr. Diamond, Ambassador Eichenberry, Dr. Templeman, for this invitation. As Cars noted, I'm from the RAND Washington, D.C. office. That's why I have a tie on. I apologize for that. I usually try to forget that when I leave D.C., but old habits are they die hard. And I've been in Washington far too long. As Karis mentioned, I was supposed to go out to Beijing and work for then General Eikenberry back when when I was still wearing a uniform, and was in the D.C. area at that time, and was informed by my wife that if I was going alone because of the needs of one of our kids at that moment. And for some reason, the Army didn't buy the idea that I should go and do that for a couple of years alone. So I missed out on that opportunity, and I've been pretty much homesteading in Washington ever since, with one short stint, as Karis mentioned, out in the Pacific Theater in Honolulu. And I see a couple of friends who are here now who've worked out there, and I've worked alongside there in Washington. So it's good to see that. In today's briefing, originally I was supposed to stress. Can everybody hear me? Make sure I'm okay there. I will wander occasionally. If I wander out of view, let me drag me back in if you need to. Yell at me. I'm also fine with being interrupted at any point. I know we'll have time for Q&A. But sometimes it's actually better for time management. If you have a burning question, I'm perfectly happy to stop and deal with that as we go if you want to do that. But I was first asked to really stress the security implications and really to talk about the Cross-Strait military balance. And I thought, well, that'll be a pretty quick presentation, probably 2 or 3 words, maybe a few more than that. The military balance is bad and not getting better, and we can talk more about that. But as Karis indicated, I was fortunate enough to be in Taipei just after the Xi summit, and actually had an opportunity to meet with a group with President Ma then. Did not meet Tsai Ing-wen. I've not met her, but met with some of the folks, some of the senior folks who are again helping to formulate what would be DPP policy if they come into power, as is expected here in January, well, in March, but following the January elections, and probably got a little carried away because of the fact that I was in that environment at that time with some of the sort of the political machinations that are in play at the moment. And I've tried to segue that over to talk more about security implications. Again, any questions in these areas that you want me to delve deeply into, as usual, I have more slides and more bullets than I need, but I'll go hopefully quickly through most of them, and you stop me on the ones that are most important to you. And if you have any problems understanding me, I apologize. I have reverted since my travels have been more limited. I reverted to my southern accent. I'm actually from the south of China, if you couldn't tell. So if the accent gets a little difficult, just let me know. But just a quick overview of how we're going to approach this. And again, try to cover a lot of ground. And if somebody, I don't have a watch on, and I've turned off my phone, so somebody keep track of me as we go. If I'm running long. But really, I wanted to set the stage by looking at at current cross-strait relations, if you will. And at least the way that I think I read the Xi summit, why it happened, particularly from the perspective of Beijing, why Xi Jinping would have been willing to do this at the time that he did. Whether you believe that it was 2 years in the making or not, it still is obviously pretty amazing that it happened at all. So I want to talk a little bit about that and what it might mean, and then what I call the paradigm. We're going to talk paradigms, politics, and principles before we get into the security stuff. What I call the paradigm really is the 1992 consensus and the centrality of that concept, that consensus, that paradigm, if you will, to this particular meeting and what it probably means for the future given the way things are going with political transformation in Taiwan and the upcoming elections. Then we'll look at the politics, and I kind of wanted to contrast the last sort of, I won't say the last major election. I mean, like us, every 4 years there's an election. For us, it seems like it happens every year. It's always important. But I picked these 2 years, obviously, for these were transitions on Taiwan when the party, the ruling party, switched out at the end of a 2 4 years administrations. So I want to contrast those years to kind of give some context. Then talk about the principles, and those are, I believe, at odds, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The PRC bottom line, principle, if you will, on what they consider their core interest, their core sovereignty interest, particularly in this case. And then this idea of sort of the principle of status quo, maintaining the status quo that Tsai Ing-wen is promoting, at this particular juncture, and trying to get that party, the DPP, and its fellow partners, in line with, a construct that potentially means that peace and stability, can continue to sort of define the Cross-Strait relationship, and to ask the question, is that even viable, given the transformations that are going on Taiwan, and given the clash of these principles. And then finally, we'll look at the security implications. Now, I talk a lot about context when I do that. It might seem to be getting a little off the subject, and it probably is, but I think it's important to kind of put in context, how the Chinese are viewing their long-term objectives, the objectives that are related to the two centennials, that they keep strategic objectives in line with over the next 6 years until 2021 roughly, and then beyond that for another couple decades out to the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic in 2049. And then talk a little bit about the balance of power and sort of Chinese behavior now that the balance of power has shifted, not just across the Strait, but in the Asia-Pacific region at large. And then what does this mean for the future in terms of what we might expect from behavior that could be of concern to us? Okay, so in the summit, I kind of read this in three possible ways, and then I had a fourth that's been presented more recently by some mainland Chinese interlocutors that I and some of my colleagues have had a chance to have discussions with. And the three sort of big categories. Oh, I think my lettering went weird on me there. We'll work around it. The first would be is this a gambit? I mean, at first blush, is this really Xi Jinping misreading the political situation in Taiwan and believing that he can still influence the Taiwan election? But I believe it's a fairly low likelihood of that. I don't think that Xi Jinping, his main advisors would misread it to this extent. There may be an element of hope that this could prop up Ma's image, and then by extension potentially the chances of the Kuomintang. But I really doubt that that's what was in Xi Jinping's at the front of his mind when he did this. But the second half I added based on some discussions with some Chinese interlocutors, and that's this idea that Xi Jinping fully understands the problems that the Kuomintang has right now, and that as a party in disarray, it's going to lose the election. Not only is it going to lose the election, but potentially, and really pretty seismically, potentially could lose the legislature. As difficult as that would be for the DPP to accomplish, it's still possible. Of course, they have to work with alliances in that, but it could happen. And that Xi Jinping probably, was sending a message to the Kuomintang that, stick with your bottom line principles. You will recover. You need to make sure that you build the party as you go forward, however it happens, based on that. And I actually don't, even though that's coming from, I think some mainland Chinese, scholars who are being very serious about that, I kind of don't buy that either. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. So second, then it could be a precedent, and that's that it's a message to Tsai Ing-wen and other future leaders in Taiwan that Xi and that the Chinese Communist Party are willing to set aside protocols and prerequisites to keep the relationship moving forward, to keep it on track. But I think if that was really the reason, then Xi probably wouldn't have linked, his idea of the Chinese dream so closely with the 1992 consensus, so closely with this current paradigm. That to me was an indication that he's, they're not really willing to